2 new engineers will start on Monday, he said, still toying with his fountain pen like he was signing a death sentence. We can hire 3 of them for what we're paying you, Donald. It's nothing personal, just a budgeting matter. I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew anything out of my mouth would be labeled emotional. The truth is, I'd seen this coming months ago. I just didn't think they'd sink this low. Sitting across from me was Kyle Madsen, the new Chief Technology Officer, barely 6 months into the job. 39 years old, hair slicked back, rimless glasses, MBA from Duke. He looked like he belonged in a recruiting brochure, not in engineering. To Kyle, everything could be optimized using charts and Excel spreadsheets, even people. Next to him was Monica from HR, flashing a polite smile like she was handing me an award instead of a termination notice. 2 months' salary plus unused vacation, she said, sliding a folder across the table. I didn't even look at it. That's all? Kyle raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised I wasn't panicking or begging. No questions? Most people in your position... I'm not most people, I cut him off, looking straight at him. And this is pretty straightforward? Monica glanced over at Kyle, a bit confused. They didn't understand. My silence wasn't agreement, it was the end. When trust runs out, there's nothing left to say. I stood up and packed my belongings into a cardboard box. 17 years of work, 12 large engineering blueprints, 4 generations of integrated systems, nearly 200 sleepless nights, all reduced to one box, not even 2 feet wide. No one looked up as I walked through the engineering floor. Not because they didn't care, but because they were too afraid they'd be next. Out in the parking garage, I finally checked my phone. A message from Daniel, the junior engineer I hired 10 years ago. Don, they just told us the whole team is freaking out. What's going on? I didn't reply. I just looked up at the gray sky over Seattle, hands still gripping the steering wheel. 8 years ago, I had led the full automation overhaul of Hightower Residential, the company's old name before it was acquired and rebranded as Zenith Core Properties. When I arrived, they had 3 rundown buildings and an old Pentium server. When I left, they had over 70 complexes across 5 states, with an integrated system that handled everything from leasing applications and maintenance requests to digital rent collection. And now they're telling me I'm too expensive. Not one member of the current leadership had ever seen how the system kicked into backup mode when the primary connection failed. They didn't know why the data streams were encrypted in multiple layers. They had never read a single line of the hundreds of thousands I had handwritten since 2006. They believed 3 fresh grads could replace me because they knew Python and had a couple of cloud computing certificates. I got home after dark. My wife Jennifer was sitting in the kitchen, warm light from above reflecting off the glass of wine in her hand. They did it? She asked. I nodded. Nothing left worth holding on to. Jennifer didn't say anything else. She just got up, poured me a drink, and placed her hand on my shoulder. I leaned back in the chair, looking out the window at the boats drifting silently across Lake Union. Zenith Core thought they'd cut a major cost from the budget, but they had no idea what the real price would be. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:13 a.m. It wasn't anyone from my family. The screen read, Bethany, HR Zenith Core. I let it ring. Less than a minute later, a message popped up. Donald, we're experiencing issues with the system transition. Could we arrange a quick call? Even a short consultation would be helpful. I didn't respond. The coffee on my table was still hot, but I hadn't taken a sip. Looking out at the backyard, soaked in morning dew, I felt an unsettling emptiness. Not anger, not bitterness, not disappointment. Just a long silence, like all emotions had been frozen since the night before. That silence wasn't calm, it was closure, final and cold. Jennifer walked in, holding the morning paper. Zenith Core made the finance section again, she said, setting it down. An article about their housing expansion plan in Oregon. Looks like they're confident they don't need you running the system. I smirked. They're confident because they haven't watched it fall apart yet. At 9:20, another call came, this time from an unknown number. I muted it and went back to organizing my office. For the first time in years, I finally had time to put things in order. Under a pile of documents, I found an old notebook filled with my early hand-drawn system schematics. On the last page, a note I had scribbled during one all-nighter. Not documenting is a gamble. But if no one listens, who are you writing for? I had proposed creating a technical documentation team 3 times. The first was postponed, second was rejected. Unnecessary if the system is stable. The third time, Kyle said something ice cold. Just keep it all in your head, Donald. You'll be replaced eventually anyway. Well, now I had been, and everything was falling apart. That afternoon, I received an email from Kyle. Subject: urgent consultation. The content was short and arrogant. Donald, the new team is struggling with the storage architecture. Could you assist for 1 session? Consulting fees can be arranged. Hope to hear from you. Kyle, I replied with a single sentence. I don't provide transition support. Good luck. 15 minutes later, another email from Bethany arrived. This one was longer, included an apology for how abruptly the termination was handled, and offered $350 an hour if I could help the engineering team fix back-end payment issues. I hit delete. Later that afternoon, I drove out to Shoreline Beach, where Jennifer and I once celebrated our 10-year anniversary. Sitting on the stone bench watching waves crash against the shore, I wasn't thinking about system failures or missed calls. I thought of something my father once told me. Sometimes you have to let a rotting tree fall so the ground can make space for something new. I had been the root keeping Zenith Core alive, helping it grow from a mid-tier firm to a regional powerhouse. Now they had chopped the trunk and were confused why the tree wasn't bearing fruit anymore. Late that night, I got a message from Daniel. Donald, the payment system has been frozen since 3 p.m. Maintenance data is gone. Staff are panicking because tenants aren't receiving confirmations. Kyle slammed his hand on the table and stormed out of the meeting. I didn't laugh. I didn't shake my head. I just looked at the phone like I was watching a documentary about what happens when people think they can swap out knowledge for cheap hires and fancy resumes. Jennifer sat beside me on the couch. Another call? I nodded. But this time I don't plan to pick up. Out of pride? She asked. I shook my head. Because I know. They haven't learned the lesson yet. They still think everything can be fixed with money. But there are things you can't price by the hour. The phone rang again. This time it was Kyle. I set it on the table and removed the battery. For the first time in years, I slept deeply, without dreaming, not because I felt justice was served, but because I knew the cost of disrespect always arrives, sooner or later. I started at Apex Residential in the winter of 2005, when the company was just a small office on the 3rd floor of an old building in downtown Minneapolis. Back then, they managed 5 apartment buildings, had 2 office computers running Windows XP, and used an Excel spreadsheet as their rental management system. I was hired after an interview that lasted less than 30 minutes with the founder, Walter Baines, a blunt, practical man who absolutely hated technology but was smart enough to know he needed it if he wanted to grow. I need someone who can turn this mess into something professional, he said, pointing at a flickering laptop screen. And I don't have time for PowerPoint presentations. I promised nothing except starting from scratch. In the first 6 months, I wrote code while personally installing routers, running network cables, mounting security cameras, and setting up a basic server infrastructure from a storage room that had never been cleaned. The first system I built was a tenant file management tool. Initially, only usable on the local network. Later upgraded to a secure remote portal with third-tier encryption. There was no master blueprint. Everything I built came from real needs and dozens of silent all-nighters spent coding to the hum of server fans. As Apex expanded into Illinois, then Wisconsin, and finally Colorado, the system grew too. I didn't build one massive monolith. I built a network of smart partitions that could self-direct, reroute, and respond when errors occurred. Every feature I added had a reason. Automated maintenance alerts triggered by abnormal humidity readings, algorithms that detected payment behavior trends to flag possible lease defaults, a multi-factor authentication system using dynamic tokens, something that left later hired security consultants scratching their heads. I proposed forming an internal documentation team 3 times. Each time I got the same answer: no budget for that this quarter. That quarter lasted 12 years. I stopped asking. Without a documentation team, I kept notes for myself, in my head. I knew every line I wrote, every security layer I embedded, every shortcut I added to save thousands of labor hours each year. But aside from me, no one else did. I once considered rewriting the whole thing into a more standardized architecture. Then management changed. The investors took over. Long-term plans were shelved for quarterly reports. They didn't want sustainable systems anymore. They wanted something pretty to show the board. When Kyle came in, flaunting modern experts with resumes longer than a page, I warned that the system couldn't be taught in a 6-week crash course. He waved me off, called me a gatekeeper, implying I was hoarding knowledge. I didn't argue. I gave 3 new engineers a simple task: trace the automated maintenance flow and redraw the process. It took them 3 days, and they got it wrong by the 3rd step. The following week, they tried integrating a new payment module from a third-party vendor, not realizing I had encrypted the transaction layer with a dual API system and hidden verification logic. They crashed the entire service in 14 minutes, leaving over 700 tenants unable to pay rent on time. Kyle said nothing after that, but I saw the first flicker of worry in his eyes since we started working together. When I left, none of them truly understood what they had just lost. They thought they could reverse engineer the system. They didn't know I had embedded timed locks that would disable components if maintenance cycles weren't met. I didn't do it to punish. I did it to protect user data. That was a core rule I set on day 1: never trade safety for speed. 3 days later, Daniel texted. They've brought in a company from Texas to analyze the system. Their faces look like they've walked into a maze with no map. I replied with one sentence. It's not a maze. They just don't have the patience to take it one step at a time. Outside the window, the sun was setting behind the far buildings. I poured myself a glass of cider and felt a strange calm. No one needs to know everything I've done. They only need to understand. Some things can't be rebuilt if you never respected the person who built them in the first place. I remember the morning Kyle was introduced to the entire engineering division. He walked in wearing a gray blazer, dark tie, and a smile so confident it was borderline arrogant. The CEO stood beside him, hand on Kyle's shoulder like he was introducing a celebrity. Kyle Rosen, our new Chief Technology Officer. He's going to modernize our entire tech stack. Modernize? That word hit me like a warning siren. Not because I feared new technology, but because I knew Kyle's type. They don't come to understand what works. They come to replace it because it doesn't fit their aesthetic. A week later, he began holding strategic orientation meetings. I was asked to present a full overview of the system I had built over 17 years to a group of outside consultants flown in from Chicago, along with 3 newly hired engineers fresh out of MIT and Stanford. Bright kids, no doubt, but during the session I noticed something critical. Their eyes couldn't follow the diagrams. They didn't understand why a maintenance request system had to pass through 6 layers of checks. Didn't understand why I used custom encryption instead of third-party integrations. Didn't understand why automating rental data analysis required that much complexity. After the meeting, Kyle walked into my office. He didn't mention anything I had presented. Instead, he said, "Donald, I think we need to start thinking about succession. A system only one person understands is a risk." I didn't respond, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew, from that moment, the process of removing me had begun. A week later, I was cut from the planning team for the Denver expansion project. No explanation. Important emails stopped including my name. My access to the central monitoring system was limited for security upgrades. Engineers who used to report to me were now reporting to someone new. I came home that day, dropped my bag onto the chair, and sat silently by the door. Jennifer placed a glass of ice water in my hand. "They're pushing you out," she said bluntly. I shrugged. They still need me. No one understands the system. She looked at me, not angry, just sad. That's exactly why they're afraid, and when people are afraid, they try to replace what they can't control. I forced a smile. I'm not hiding anything. They won't read the documentation. They won't listen. That's the problem, Jennifer interrupted. They don't want to understand. They want to simplify, restructure, standardize. That's their language. But you're the last one who still holds on to real value. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was anxious, but because I opened file after file, line after line of code, every structure I had written. I asked myself, if I vanished tomorrow, how long would this system survive? The following month, Kyle launched a project called Full Restructuring of Operational Management System. They hired a firm from Texas, promising to move everything to cloud infrastructure within 3 months. I wasn't invited to meetings, no one asked for my input, but each night Daniel, the most loyal engineer I had ever trained, texted me updates. They can't process data from the old maintenance system. They accidentally deleted the access control queries. They can't decode the secure storage structure. I wasn't surprised, I was just disappointed. Disappointed in a generation of leadership that didn't understand value isn't about flashy interfaces or bullet point reports. Value lives in the depth, the complexity that runs smoothly, like a fine-tuned machine only a skilled craftsman can keep alive. Jennifer looked at me by the window, sunset reflecting off her glasses. What will you do if they come back, asking for help? I didn't turn. I don't know, but one thing's for sure. This time, they need to learn that you can't throw value away and expect it to come back with a phone call. Out there, the waves had already started rising. But inside me, everything had been quiet for a long time. I was making coffee when the phone rang. The caller ID showed a familiar extension, from Zenith Corps headquarters. I let it ring. When the sound stopped, a message appeared. Donald, this is Jill from HR. We're facing a major issue with the operations system. Could we talk today? We really need your help. I didn't reply. 2 hours later, it was Kyle's turn. No text, just a direct call. I let it go to voicemail. Moments later, his voice came through the speaker. Donald, it's Kyle. The engineering team is facing serious problems with the maintenance and auto payment systems. We understand the previous situation was tense, but if you could spare some time to help, we're willing to offer appropriate compensation. Please call back. I set my coffee down and stepped onto the porch. The wind was light, Seattle skies overcast as always. I didn't feel anything, not anger, not satisfaction, just certainty. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had warned. Daniel texted that night. Tenant portal is completely down. No one can log in. Customer support is overwhelmed. Kyle's nearly lost it. I replied with 2 words. I know. The next morning, Jill called again. This time, I picked up. Hi, Donald. Thank you so much for answering. I'm calling on behalf of the executive board. The maintenance and billing systems are completely down. We're flooded with hundreds of support requests, and you're the only one who understands how it all works. I said nothing. Jill continued, her voice quieter. We're offering $500 an hour. You could work remotely. No need to come in. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop, not to inspect the system, but to reread the email from 3 months ago, where they sent my termination notice, wrapped in cold language, cost optimization for future growth. I spoke slowly. Jill, I understand the situation, but I think what you need isn't a consulting engineer. What you need is a lesson. A lesson? Jill hesitated. I'm not declining because of the money. I'm declining because I warned this would happen, and no one listened. Today, you're not calling me because I'm the best fit. You're calling because you have no one else. She didn't respond for a few seconds. Then she hung up. No follow-up. That afternoon, Kyle called again. But this time he came to my house. I heard the knock. When I opened the door, he stood there. Suit wrinkled, tie loose, hair a mess. He didn't look like a CTO. He looked like a man who had just walked out of chaos. Donald, I know I said things I shouldn't have. I know we handled this wrong. He swallowed hard. But now the system is completely down. We can't access 3 months of payment data. Thousands of tenants were billed incorrectly. We're losing clients, losing control. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Now do you understand why I proposed a technical documentation team? Kyle nodded. You were right. About everything. We're paying the price. I'm ready to propose. Whatever fee you name, just please come back. I looked at him, not angry, not cold, just calm. You know something, Kyle, I said. True value isn't about salary. It's about the nights I spent fixing bugs while no one asked if I was okay. The times I warned about data integrity and no one listened. When I offered to train new engineers and you said I was old-fashioned. So now what? Kyle lowered his head. I'm not coming back, I continued. Not out of bitterness, but because I've made my choice. I only build where people truly care about preserving value. And your team? You wanted something disposable when it became inconvenient. Kyle looked up, voice nearly pleading. Just 1 week, 1 day, you set the terms. I shook my head. I've already made my decision, Kyle. I'm letting you pay the price. Don't call again. I closed the door. He didn't knock a second time. That night, Jennifer looked at me. Do you regret it? I placed my hand over hers. No, that wasn't refusing to help. That was refusing to be used. Out there, their system was collapsing. But inside me, for the first time in years, was peace. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer belonged to a place that didn't understand who I was. I was tidying up a few things in the garage when an email from an unfamiliar address popped up on my phone. The subject line had only 3 words. Quick exchange. The sender, Caleb Monroe, Chief Technology Officer, Salvia Tech. I paused, opened the message. The contents made me read it twice. Donald, I've been following your technical work for a long time, even before Zenith Core changed its name. Several peers in the industry agree you're one of the rare few who still prioritize durability and security in an era obsessed with speed and cost optimization. I have a serious invitation. We need a brand new internal property management system. Start to finish. No patchwork, no cobbling. If you still have an interest in building something truly worth it, I'd like to invite you to lunch. You pick the place, I'll fly there. I didn't respond immediately, but I didn't delete the email. 3 days later, I agreed to meet Caleb at a quiet cafe by Lake Union, the kind of place no one from real estate or tech circles would frequent. When I arrived, he was already seated. No blazer, no badge, just a man in his mid-40s with sharp eyes and unexpectedly calloused hands for someone in technology. Donald, he said, shaking my hand, I don't need a presentation. I need trust. And I think you might be the last person in this industry who still understands it. I stayed silent, observing. Caleb didn't waste time. Salvia Tech currently manages infrastructure for over 12,000 housing units along the East Coast, but the current system was built by an overseas team, poor support, worse security. Last month, we lost 36 hours of payment data. It cost us nearly $500,000 in 1 weekend. He straightened up, looked me in the eye. I don't want you to fix the old system. I want you to destroy it and build from scratch. Your way. I raised an eyebrow. And you think I'm the best person for that? No, I think you're the only one left who knows how to do it right the first time. I didn't react. Just sipped my coffee, waiting for the rest. Caleb continued. I'm offering you the role of Chief Systems Architect. Starting salary 20% higher than what you earned at Zenith Core, company equity, full freedom to choose your own engineering team, and full control of the system development budget. Any conditions? I asked. Yes. You have to commit to one thing. No shortcuts. No trimming. No skipping the 4th security layer because of time pressure. I want a system no one can break. Not skipping. Nor discard. No, I looked him straight in the eye. Why? Caleb smiled. Because I once lost everything by trusting a system that was fast and cheap. I won't let that happen again. We sat another 20 minutes, never touching technical specs, just talking about systems that failed because they were designed like consumer products instead of critical infrastructure. That night, I told Jennifer, She didn't ask what I would do. She just said, if they're giving you full control, then this time, build what you've always wanted. Something that doesn't need a hero to keep it alive. I emailed Caleb my confirmation the next morning. 4 days later, I had an official contract, access credentials, and an offer. You pick where the office goes. We'll build around it. I chose a small building on the outskirts of Bellevue, far from the big corporate headquarters, but close enough to recruit talented people who hadn't yet been swallowed by the emotionless machinery of multinational firms. The following week, I began sketching the first architecture, not on software, but on paper, with the hands and memory of someone who once built an entire system no one dared take apart, line by line. Meanwhile, emails from Zenith Core kept arriving. Kyle, then Jill, and someone new named Marcus. Apparently their latest crisis management hire. I read every word, but I didn't reply to any of them. I was busy building something else. Something I knew no one could ever buy back just because their stock price dropped. A system with a soul, not just source code. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone call it too expensive. I was in a meeting with my newly hired engineering team at the Bellevue office when the glass door opened. A man stood there, rain speckled on his coat, holding an old laptop. I recognized him instantly, Eric Weller, the former database team lead at Zenith Core, who used to sit across from me for 3 years. There's something you should know, he said quickly, voice rough from the cold and maybe months of stress. I nodded, signaling my team to take a break. Eric set down his bag, sat across from me in the leather chair, eyes locked as if unsure where to start. Donald, they're losing control. Not just glitches, total collapse. I didn't respond, waiting for him to continue. 3 months of payment data is nearly unrecoverable. They thought the backup system was still running, but no one followed the original protocols you built. A new engineer cleaned up several versions to save space, and that was it. He pulled out an external drive. I salvaged part of it using an old snapshot, but don't ask how. I quietly took the drive and set it aside. So what's their plan now? They're bringing in a recovery team from Atlanta, over $200,000 just for them to take a look at the architecture. Their first conclusion, guess what it was? Eric gave a dry laugh. I said nothing. The system was designed as a complex, interlinked structure with tiered security impossible to modify, without a master diagram and deep-level access. I exhaled, not out of relief, but because I knew that ending was inevitable. They need someone who's been inside, Eric said. They're looking for you. I know, I replied, but I'm not going back. Eric nodded slowly. Neither am I, he said. I turned in my resignation this morning, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I no longer respect the people in charge. I looked at him for a long moment. So, why did you come here? Eric opened his laptop. Because I want to work with someone I trust. If you're rebuilding from scratch, I want in. I don't care about salary. I just want a place that doesn't treat engineers as disposable. I gripped his hand. Welcome to Solviatech. 3 days later, I received an email from Timothy Rhodes, CEO of Ironcrest Holdings, the company that owns nearly 30% of Zenith Core. We've been informed that the system's largest client, Maverick Communities, will officially terminate their contract by the end of the quarter. Reasons cited: ongoing payment issues, system instability, and a loss of confidence in data security. I frowned. Maverick I had been the one to build their dedicated auto payment portal. They handled nearly 28% of Zenith Core's monthly transactions. Losing Maverick would tank the company's pre-IPO valuation. Timothy continued. We've heard you're now working at Solviatech. Maverick has also approached us to ask whether Solvia could take over operations for their residential communities in 3 eastern states. I hope you'll be able to meet their representatives soon. That same evening, my phone rang. A woman's voice came through. Hello, Mr. Donald. This is Lisa Morgan, Chief Technology Officer at Maverick Communities. I've heard about your work with Caleb Monroe. We're considering moving our entire operations to Sylvia's infrastructure, but before we decide, I need an honest answer. I'm ready, I said. Could you build a new system capable of importing all our data without service disruption within 90 days? I paused for a few seconds. I won't promise what I can't deliver. But if I promise, I'll keep it no matter what. Lisa hesitated. I like how you put that. Then we want to work with you. We'll fund the initial infrastructure, but you must lead everything. No middlemen. No third parties. I looked up at the whiteboard in my office, where the new system architecture was slowly branching out. Then I answered, I accept. As I hung up, Caleb walked in. I handed him the notes from Lisa. He finished reading and nodded. Then the game has begun. I just smiled. Because I knew this time I was making the first move, no longer the one being replaced. I was the one entrusted to rebuild the foundation. And I wasn't going to let anyone break it again. A week after the call with Maverick Communities, I sat in the fourth-floor conference room at Solviatech's new headquarters, in front of the rollout plan for the first system I had fully redesigned from the ground up. I struck a red line under the last sentence. Documentation is mandatory. No exceptions, no cuts. No more abandoned memos, no more proposals dismissed for budget reasons. This time, I had full authority, and I swore I wouldn't repeat Zenith Corps' mistakes. The implementation plan was divided into 3 phases. Phase 1. Build the core infrastructure, a scalable 3-layer security system independent of any third-party modules. Phase 2. Integrate Maverick's data with dual monitoring protocols to ensure not a single transaction was lost. Phase 3. Train the internal engineering team on system architecture, from how it handles real-time faults to how to write documentation clear enough for newcomers. I glanced at Eric, who was now leading recruitment. He scanned the candidate list, nodding repeatedly. 3 people from the old Zenith Corps team reached out. One of them is Ellie. Remember her? I nodded. She was the one who helped me spot a flaw in the authentication layer before she turned 24. She wants out of that toxic environment and to start fresh. I've sent her an interview invite. I smiled. Perfect. Put her on the documentation team. By the end of the week, our engineering team had grown to 14, 6 of whom were my former colleagues, people once pushed aside or driven away by the cut-and-rush management mindset. I began designing Maverick's new operational system step by step, each processing block independent but tightly connected via a central control hub, modeled after the synchronized neural systems in the human body. I didn't just want it to run, I wanted it to heal itself when something broke. Everything was being documented. I required each engineer to write documentation for their module, then have it peer-reviewed. No one was allowed to work without understanding how the whole thing connected. One late afternoon, as I was reviewing the system map, Caleb walked in holding a new contract. Donald, he said, Maverick no longer wants a phased migration. They want a full transfer within 90 days. All old systems will be shut down. I looked up. They're certain? Certain. They've run out of patience. And they trust you. I walked to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and erased the phased integration section. I wrote a single line in its place. Full migration in 75 days. Training starts now. From that day on, we worked non-stop. Mornings were for deploying core code, afternoons for simulated stress testing, evenings for internal documentation sessions, not just to teach how to operate, but how to think about architecture, sustainability, and the consequences if future teams don't understand the past. In the 5th week, Ellie suggested an additional encryption layer for the auto-payment system that made me reevaluate the entire map. Your approach to timed access control is elegant, I said. No one at Zenith Corps ever thought of that. She smiled. That's because no one there ever asked for my input. I knew, this time, people weren't just working. They were building something they wanted their names on. By the 9th week, the system was nearly complete. We began testing Maverick's full data set, over 18 million transactions, 4,200 admin accounts, and 76 residential sites across 5 states. Not a single data mismatch. Not one line of code failed. That day, I stood before the engineering team, seeing exhaustion on their faces, but also a fire in their eyes. I'm not saying you've built a good system, I said. I'm saying you just laid the foundation for a new standard. and we're not going back to the old way. No one spoke, but in their eyes I saw it clearly. For the first time, they understood the value of what they were protecting. As for me, I knew this was just the beginning. Because after Maverick, bigger names were already starting to look our way. 6 months after Maverick's new system went fully operational, a surprising message landed in my inbox. The sender was Caleb Monroe, and the subject had just 3 words. We just won. I opened it. Donald, I've just signed the final memorandum. Solviatech has officially acquired all of Zenith Core's technology assets and infrastructure at a valuation of 1/4 what it was before the collapse. The contract was approved by both boards. First order of business? We need you to lead the integration of the entire legacy platform into Solviatech's systems. New title, Director of Strategic Integration. You decide who comes with you. I read each line as if retracing my journey, being discarded, refusing to be used, starting from scratch, and now being the one tasked with rebuilding a system that had fallen under the weight of its own arrogance. 3 weeks later, I walked into the lobby of Zenith Core's former headquarters, now bearing the new name Solvia Property Systems. Everything looked just as it had when I left, the glass walls, recessed lighting, gray-carpeted hallways. But the faces were different. Many I had once worked with were no longer there. A few who remained looked at me with a mix of hope and unease. I didn't blame them. Everyone had to survive in their own way when the storm hit. Caleb led me through the departments, stopping at the door that had once been Kyle's office. We kept very few from the old executive team, he said. Kyle's gone. No goodbye. I didn't ask for more. Didn't feel the need. We held our first meeting with the remaining staff. I stood before more than 70 people holding the integration blueprint. I'm not here to fix old mistakes, I said, voice steady and clear. I'm here to rebuild. The right way, this time. I pointed to the board, a simple 3-layer diagram showing process flow, safety checkpoints, and documentation stages. Each of you will not just be implementers, you'll be understanders. If you don't know why a line of code needs 3 layers of security, you'll learn. If you've never written technical documentation, you'll be trained. A young engineer raised a hand. What about the new hires? Where will they learn? I smiled. From the new department we're launching next week, the Next Gen Engineering Development Division. I looked around. I've built systems that could run themselves. But this time, I'm building an ecosystem, where knowledge isn't locked in one person's head. In the following 6 months, we hired 30 more engineers, divided into tracks: operations, security, data, and training. Each week, I led at least 2 sessions, not because I was the best, but because I wanted those who'd seen failure to know how to prevent it from repeating. One late afternoon, as I was sketching a new modular structure for the rental system on the whiteboard, a soft knock came. It was Ellie. You have a visitor, she said. The former CFO of Zenith Core. Mr. Parker. I stepped out. The man before me had grayed significantly, with tired eyes, but an honest expression. He held out his hand, no pretense. I owe you an apology, he said, and a thank you. Without you, everything would have burned to the ground. I shook his hand. I didn't come back to collect debts. I came back to make sure we get it right this time. He nodded, then quietly left. As the sun set behind the distant buildings, I sat alone in the old server room. Under the soft yellow light, the LEDs still blinked with the rhythm of passing data. These systems had once been a part of me. Now, I was setting them free from the shadow of their past. I didn't need recognition, didn't need anyone to say I was right. All I needed was a new generation of engineers, ones who understood that building wasn't just writing source code, but laying the foundation for lasting resilience. That night, I finished the final proposal for Solvia, the first formal systems engineering school in the property tech industry. Not to make a name, but so that people like me would never again be called too expensive. Donald's story is living proof that true value isn't about cost. It's about the depth of experience and dedication. In an era obsessed with speed and profit margins, he chose a different path: to build systems that last, to train people, and to let results speak for themselves. Without revenge, without resentment, Donald quietly proved that character and professional ethics still have a place. And sometimes, they're exactly what helps someone rise above the very system that once turned its back on them. What do you think about Donald's choices? Would you have done the same in his place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about life and family.